Hello, hello everyone, and welcome to today's WWF press conference. Today at COP29, it is Finance Day, but in many ways, every day at this COP is Finance Day. We'll be today discussing the core issues of climate finance being debated and negotiated at the summit, as well as looking at the draft NCQG texts and what they tell us about the state of negotiations. But we'll also be talking about the crucial role of private finance and how decisions made in the everyday economy are also crucial for driving climate and nature action at scale. On our panel today, we have Manuel Polga Vidal, WWF's Global Climate and Energy Lead. He's also a former Environment Minister and COP20 President. We have Aaron Vermeulen, who is WWF's Global Finance Lead, Fernanda Carvalho, who is WWF's Global Climate and Energy Policy Lead, and Maheen Khan, International Climate Resilience Advisor for WWF Netherlands. Manuel, will you take us away?
Thank you, Robin, and hello to you all. So it is true, it is not only the Finance Day. This COP has been branded as the COP for Finance. So that is what we are expecting to have by the end of COP29, a strong finance outcome. And we all know that when it is about that outcome, it is about the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal. And 2 hours ago, I've been participating in a so interesting high-level discussion roundtable around the net zero high-level expert group that it was called Integrity Matters, something related to the net zero. But let me bring that concept. When it is about finance, integrity matters. I think that is an important title if we do want to continue pushing towards get a strong outcome for finance. So it is not credible when it is about finance to have some actors saying it is too expensive, it is too difficult, it is too complex. We have to get a strong outcome for finance because without that outcome, it will be almost impossible to put the world on track towards 1.5 and towards net zero objective. And yesterday, what we saw, it was, as part of the negotiations, a new document with 34 pages. And that document, it has been supposedly streamlined into something with less pages. But still, there are many options. So let me share with you some ideas on what we as WWF believe must be by the end of this COP, some key element for the NCQG. So when it is about the objective, there are many options. That the objective of the NCQG, it is to fulfill and to achieve the objective that it is in Article 2 of Paris Agreement. It is to accelerate transitions, and it is because the global stocktake recommendation that we know how important it is for the next cycle of the NDCs. For us as WWF, it is because there are 3 reasons. So the reason to have an NCQG, it is to achieve that, and it is to accelerate and to take the recommendation of the GST. When it is about the purpose, we believe that the NCQG, it is to be delivered to the global south, to the developing world. That is the main purpose of the NCQG, because it is the global south and the developing world that deserve more financial resources to achieve with their own climate objective, but also with a transition. Because if we have to transition, we have to get the resources to move those transitions forward. It is so interesting that the text, it is referring to the cost. And it is around an average of 5 trillions until 2030 that it would be the cost to achieve NDCs, $5 trillion. And when it is about an annual cost to achieve NDCs, it is about 500 billion per year. So we know how much it costs, how expensive it is for the global south to cover that cost. So that is why the importance of the NCQG. But also, what we do need, it is to make a structural transformation of the climate finance system by defining clear strategies to get there. Also, something important for us, it is the balance in between mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. In our WWF expectation paper, we refer to at least 300 billion for mitigation, 300 billion for adaptation, 400 billion for loss and damage, and that is what WWF at least is expecting by the end of this COP. What are those key principles that must guide the NCQG, the equity principle, the CBDR principle, common but differentiated responsibility, a human rights-based, the consideration of the needs of the more vulnerable people, the needs and rights, so to protect needs and rights of indigenous peoples, and the gender equality. So those are elements that we hope we can see by the end of this outcome related to the NCQG. In relation to the quantum, the G77 is proposing 1.3 trillion, and we believe that that could be the baseline number that we have to get by the end of this COP29. Let me finish by referring to two more things. What are those conditions? We have to simplify processes. We have to reduce the current conditions that are limiting the access, mostly to the Global South, to those resources. We have to enable in some other conditions, and we have to act with transparency, effectiveness, and efficiency. But also we have to make the financial system fit for purpose, and for sure, we do want to see that all of this, it is also to phase out fossil fuels, something that we define in the UAE consensus by the concept of transitioning away from fossil fuels. Last point for this expected NCQG, it is that it must include a review process. So that is, in a nutshell, what we do believe and expect must be by the end of this COP29, the NCQG. Thank you very much.
For Aaron.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. So Manuel was talking about the billions that we need to stick to and have northern governments commit to. But if you look at the total number of dollars that are needed, we're talking about 1.6 trillion for the Global South, and then globally we need 7.4 trillion. And the Global Policy Initiative, they estimated that currently that level is at 1.5 trillion. So on one hand, we need to keep talking here at the negotiations about the hundreds of billions, but we also need to start thinking about how are we going to unlock the trillions from the private sector. So the private sector needs to be aligned need to be aligned with the 2.1c paragraph of the Paris Agreement. And national governments need to make sure that the 2.1c alignment of the financial sector is integrated in the NDCs that they have and are currently developing. So what they need to do is to, sorry, I'm reading from my phone, so it's flipping up and down. So what they need to do is really think about national transition plans to net zero and nature positive. And we launched a great report at Cali in COP16, which is the global roadmap to nature positive, which provides perfect guidance for national governments on that. And then also for the private sector, they need to make transition plans and disclosure mandatory. Taxonomies are also really important. So we shouldn't only think about green taxonomies, but also about brown taxonomies, and make sure that there's no greenwashing involved. Then on the private side, we have the science-based targets initiatives, and more private companies and banks need to sign up to that. On top of that, they need to start developing transition plans and adopt disclosures such as TNFD and TCFD on finance and on climate and nature. The development banks are also playing a very important role. They need to support government and private sector to develop these transition plans to net zero and nature positive, but also they can play a very important role in de-risking and providing credit enhancement for private companies to get on board. So what is WWF doing? Let me share two very important initiatives that we are currently working on. So one is the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, which is a really nice story where NGOs and private sector companies came together to develop a pipeline of bankable climate resilience project in the Global South. It started with a 200 million grant from the Dutch government, but it now is a 1.5 billion fund and has mobilized an enormous amount of private sector money to nature and climate. But also on the greening finance side, we're doing work with the central banks and supervisors with a benchmark for these entities. So we're benchmarking these supervisors and central banks, but we're also looking at how they're making progress. So the good news is, in the past 4 years, they made quite a good of progress. That's mainly on the banking side, less on the insurance side. But there's still a tremendous gap on how they are supervising on nature-related issues. So how are they supervising on transforming forests, freshwater and marine habitats? And also, we see a lack of progress on the high-emitting, high-income countries when they are working on climate-related disclosures and transition plans. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, just some more details on the negotiations. Previously, we had a text that had 9 pages, and that was blown up to 34 pages, which was kind of disappointing. There's a good side and a bad side to it. The good side is that it contains all options still, and the bad side is that it contains all options still. So the presidency had asked countries to have a streamlined text by Saturday, and the version that came out last night was just 1 page less, so 33 pages, and all options are still there. So there's still a long menu of options that cast some doubts over if what we will be able to deliver on Saturday as required by the presidency. On the positive side, we see some options alluding to fossil fuel phase out. No money for fossil fuel phase out, and that's key, that's very important, as Manuel mentioned. 80% of emissions are connected to fossil fuel phase out. We saw some stronger options on just transition support that we have seen before. We hope those stay in the text. But in related to a fossil fuel phase out, the quantity of finance needed is not mentioned in the text, and that's a problem all across the text. We are discussing the how. We never get to the how much. Actually, we are discussing the what. We don't get to the how much. And those things are intrinsically connected. So the quantum is still the elephant in the room. As Manuel mentioned, we talk about at least 1 trillion. Some countries are talking about 1.3 trillion of public finance, and that's really key. We should remind ourselves that this is a process of governments. Of course, private finance is going to be a piece of this pie, but we are here to discuss the public finance that we need to provide to developing countries to cater for their needs, as per the Paris Agreement and the UNFCCC. So what we also saw on the test that was interesting is that there is an option on the definition of finance that talks about finance not contributing to the expansion and continuation of production of fossil fuels. That's an option we also hope that will stay there. And I would like to remind you that WWF's position and civil society position as a whole is that when we talk about the quantum of the NCQG, we should consider windows for mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. We saw some shy loss and damage pledges coming up in the ministerial high level on finance today. Those are welcome, but we are still at billions scale, and we know we need trillions for loss and damage. We want a sound definition of finance. We also want transparency and quality of finance. We favor grants over loans for disbursement of finance. And we also would like to see some innovative sources, because we know that traditional ODA is not going to do it. We welcome some interesting developments this week, since this is a finance COP. There was an MDB joint declaration, I think, and an MDB report on finance. And the MDBs are talking about the importance of the NCQG. That's great. But our hope is that there's real streamlining of this text. I should also remind ourselves that we have been 2 years in this discussion, and that this is a key outcome from this COP. And this outcome is also relevant on the road to Belém, because without a strong NCQG, we won't have the NDCs that we need to close the ambition gap to 1.5. So everything's connected, and please move and deliver.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I will talk a bit about adaptation finance needs, what's happening in the negotiation rooms, and what is it that WWF is working towards when it comes to adaptation. We continue to witness rising greenhouse gas emissions and intensifying climate impacts globally. In 2024, once again, we saw catastrophic floods, droughts, forest fires, and storms. I'm very aware you know that, but needs reiterating for what I'm about to highlight upon. From Sri Lanka to Sudan, Bangladesh to Spain, Pakistan to France, Brazil to Morocco, Afghanistan to Italy, the list goes on, and the year is yet to end. As per the UNEP reports that came out in the weeks preceding COP, we are on a 2.6 to 3.1 degrees Celsius trajectory, and that's a world that will look vastly different from the one that we live in now, modestly speaking. There is an emphasis from the Adaptation Gap report on the persistent widening gap in adaptation finance needs in developing countries. While there has been progress between 2021 and 2022 towards doubling adaptation finance, it is not remotely close to what is needed to respond to impacts in these countries, and the estimated finance gap stand at USD 251 to 387 billion. At COP29, we must achieve a strong component for adaptation finance under the new collective quantified goal that is to be agreed this year by parties, as just been mentioned by my colleagues. This must be grant-based and highly concessional international public climate finance primarily. In Baku, adaptation agenda items are being negotiated in full swing. For the global goal on adaptation, targets for achieving which were established last year in Dubai, currently work is underway to develop measuring progress on the targets that have been set, indicators, such as for water, food and agriculture, ecosystems and biodiversity, among others, as adaptation is needed in every sector of an economy. To enable adaptation action that will work towards achieving these very targets and goals, tracking of provision of finance, capacity, and technology are crucial. Finally, national adaptation plans are due to be submitted next year in 2025. These must be country-driven, gender-responsive, and nature-based adaptation action, amongst others. Impactful action is preceded by strong intersectional planning that highlight vulnerabilities, costs, and monitoring systems. These plans must be further integrated and aligned with nationally determined contributions and other relevant national planning instruments for coherence. Time is of the essence. Adaptation also has limits, like the planetary limits. If we don't act now with immediate urgency, costs of adaptation will rise, and solutions that we know are effective and are working with may be at risk of being adversely affected by climate impacts. Hence, Baku is pivotal for adaptation. I'll stop there.
I would like to apologize that I have to run, so I have to leave the press conference. Sorry for that, my apologies, but see you around, and back to you, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you for the panel. If anyone has any questions, can you please raise your hands for the panel? Any thoughts, reflections? Maybe I'll ask Fernanda to begin with how you see the NCQG talks progressing, potentially setting out a timeline for when we might see new texts, what needs to be achieved this week to make next week successful?
Well, today there was an informal just before this panel. It finished at 12. We didn't see much progress. We would like to see progress. I think that, we need political will, we need a spirit of cooperation from parties. As I mentioned the other day, we are all in this together, and we're only going to solve the climate crisis together. So it's time to try to focus on what the agreement wants us to deliver, because sometimes the finance discussions always go sideways, if you like. There are some new elements, like, should we be discussing a new set of countries that should contribute and things like that, rather than going back to the basis. Countries need to comply with their obligations under the Convention and the Paris Agreement to support developing countries. It is very basic. Money is available, so I think that, we have to foster a spirit of cooperation and to tackle the climate crisis together, because as my colleague just spoke on adaptation and loss and damage are increasing. The least we do mitigation. We saw this year, in the country I'm from, in Brazil, we had all the impacts that one can think about: fires, droughts, heat waves, record heat waves. No country is untouched. We saw that in Europe as well as the United States. So it's not a problem of developing or developed countries. So let's come together and try to get to the core of the questions that we are here to tackle, that is climate change, and guaranteeing a 1.5 future.
Thank you. Any questions in the room? Please raise your hand. Whilst you're still thinking of questions, I will go to Aaron. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about the sort of actions governments could be taking to put in place alternative, innovative funding solutions to help channel private finance for climate and nature action? Yes, governments and the role.
Well, I mentioned some in my pitch, right? So on one hand, governments really should make transition plans and disclosures mandatory, so they encourage private companies and their financiers to disclose how their portfolios are at risk from climate change and nature degradation. So that's on the greening finance side. But then also there needs to be a proliferation of pipeline of investable, bankable projects. And for a large part, they need to be happening in the global south, in the emerging markets, where the risks, the political risk, the financial risk are sometimes too high for commercial banks locally to take on. So they need to be de-risked with a financial instrument called blended finance. That needs to be deployed by northern governments on top of the commitments that I already mentioned, right, and that Manuel mentioned. But there's a high appetite from the private sector to invest, but there's not enough pipeline. And I think all stakeholders need to come together to develop a pipeline of renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and other sustainable investments.
Great, thanks. And, oh, sorry, I have a question there.
Hi, I'm Sarah Green from Michigan Tech University. It's on? Okay. Wants me to stand up. I'm Sarah Green from Michigan Tech University, and I'm a chemist, not a finance person at all. But I'm curious, we hear often about public versus private finance, and of course, the negotiations are a public government activity. But what should governments be doing to promote and facilitate more investment from the private sector? Thank you.
Right, well. Well, I tried to explain that in the answer to Robin's question, but I think on one hand they should narrow the funnel of harmful investments with regulation. So that's happening through central banks and financial supervisors. That's on one hand, but then they also should enable a continuous flow of sustainable investments to the things that we need, right? So, as Maheen said, climate resilience, climate adaptation, mitigation. Which are not historically not the type of stuff private sector likes to do. So we need to really work together, and it requires multiple stakeholders to make these investments happen. And so it requires NGOs on the ground, local people on the ground, to identify and quantify what is needed. But it also requires development banks to work with commercial banks to de-risk some of these investments.
Thank you. Two questions in the middle there. Can we get the microphone? Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I'm Jennifer Krill from Earthworks. I'm based in the US, and after our recent election results and the incoming administration, I'm wondering if you have any comments on how we can overcome resistant public officials from the US perspective, but I know US is not the only country that has a role to play in public finance. What are your thoughts on how we can help get advancements in the face of administrations like the one that we're going to have in the US soon?
Thanks. Can we get the other question as well?
Hi, my name is Catherine. I'm a student from Emory University in the US, and I was wondering what you think the role of climate communication, how that can help private finance be more involved in financing the energy transition, or just climate change in general.
Fernando, would you be able to take that first one?
Yeah, I can take the first question. I wish I had an answer, but I think that, of course, the situation now is a situation of doubt. We don't know what's going to happen, but the Paris Agreement's not built around specific administrations, and it has endured a Trump administration before. So the discussion now is that the bill has got much more expensive, and we need significantly more resources than we had before. And we hope other actors can come in, but also the discussion on private sector, and I think this process here has to send the right signals to the private sector, so connects to your question as well. We are talking about national plans, like nationally determined contributions. They should send the right signals. They could be seen as investment plans, as many countries put that. So I think that's a way of trying to get finance. But there are also other innovative sources of public finance, and they are quite obvious, such as shifting subsidies from what's bad to what's good. There are discussions happening in the G20 around taxing the wealth, the richest, and things like that, levies on shipping and aviation. All those things should be explored, and they could contribute to the climate problem. So we think it's not a one solution for everything, but we think the role of the UNFCCC should be driving the core of public finance. That should be, 1 trillion plus, and should be sending the right signals to the private sector, and we should be looking for innovative sources. That would be my attempt.
Thank you, and I guess I'll take the question on climate communication. We know we face these significant headwinds against our arguments, but we also know that there's a really positive case that can be made about the benefits of climate action and what financing our future can achieve, for both mitigating the risks and the disastrous consequences of global heating, but also those benefits that come with investment in a low-carbon economy and a nature-positive future. And we just need to find ways to tell those stories in a more convincing way, and to bring the voices that can be convincing to others into this discussion as well. We know that there's great case studies out there of small enterprises and other corporates doing really strong action, and how it's improved their business and made really strong contributions. So we need to tell those stories, and also be able to empower people to tell their own stories as well. WWF has a really important voice in this, but we also need others to tell these stories as well, and empower corporate leaders to do so. So we're hopeful that we can tell these stories and we can win these arguments, and hopefully hearing our arguments today has been helpful for you all. That's the end of our press conference today. We'll have some of our speakers available afterwards for further comment at the back of the room. Please do subscribe to our daily newsletter, and we look forward to seeing you later in the summit. Thank you.
Hi. So I'm from the secretariat side of this room. Fortunately, those are not working today. So you have an option to speak there or with the portable mics. All right. So as you see, we make it like even have to.